Firestorm. For those unaware, this is Battlefield 5's attempt at a battle royale. Yep, it has one, genuinely. It's actually pretty solid in a lot of ways. There's some genuine fun to be had, and some elements of it are really well executed. But it's essentially being near totally wasted from a potential and basic user numbers perspective, at least as far as we can gauge from in-game parameters. Realistically speaking, there's no logical reason that this downward trend won't continue. The only shot it has at growing, surviving, or being saved as it were, are two distinct, very large changes. Changes that could well give Firestorm a sizable boost if heavily advertised as well. And this is also why I think it's very unlikely to happen, but I want to put them forwards regardless, so at least the discussion is out there, and a slight chance of it being acted upon can retain a small amount of hope. So I'll go over today what Firestorm is struggling with, why that's the case, and then what those two key things are that I think are the only chance for its long-term success. And no, it's not new weapons, new points of interest, altering shotguns because they're absolute trash tier for the vast majority of the game, or changing the looting system to loot boxes or anything like that. Although obviously those kinds of changes are very welcome and are great quality of life improvements. But just while we're on the subject, have they scrapped the loot box change idea? Like, where is it? Have they decided it's not worth the effort due to player numbers? In a similar fashion to how they recently removed Frontlines and Domination as permanent modes? I don't know, I hope not, but I haven't seen it mentioned for ages now, so we're still stuck with the loot just being kinda like spread on the ground, which means you sometimes can't pick pieces of it up, etc. It's just kinda weird to me. But anyway, before we get into the key 2 points that I would change, let's cover the evidence that Firestorm isn't being used optimally and has a pretty bleak looking future currently. Well, there's the wait times. For example, to grab some of this footage, I played in the UK at the optimal time of day for playing numbers, and I assume we were usually connected to German servers, meaning we had a whole chunk of Europe to connect to, and we still had wait times of 4 minutes, 6 minutes, even 8 minutes, just to get into a game from selecting Firestorm. Keep in mind this isn't a 100-player battle royale either, it's 64 players. It's genuinely that difficult to fill the lobby at times, even from an area of the world which has a proportionately high player base. Now this is on Xbox, which potentially has some impact, but it's still excessive. It's not like the Xbox isn't widely used or anything. In case you missed the point, this indicates pretty damn low player numbers. But here in the UK, and those of you in the US and other such places, well, we have it easy, I promise you. I get plenty of people saying they can't play in like Asia, for example, or they end up on servers with atrocious lag. Or what about Australia? I actually tried to play Firestorm with Modest Pelican a while ago, and besides it being awful for ping, because duh, he's in Australia, he demonstrated how hard it is to simply get a game of Firestorm going over there. I believe we had 2 or 3 searches where it just didn't find the game after long wait times, and then eventually it put us into a lobby that wasn't full and the game eventually started, or something like that. I can't quite remember, but I do remember being actually surprised by how bad it was. The stories about playing over there are true, and that was weeks and weeks back. He also told me at the time that if he tries to jump into another multiplayer experience, like Fortnite or Rocket League or whatever, he has no problems at all. So it's Firestorm that's causing the issue. Then there's that Duos was removed from Firestorm, even with a minor outcry from the community. It doesn't matter if it's because the player numbers in Duos were low, or if it's because it was the lowest of the 3 options, and Firestorm is struggling to fill lobbies across all of them. The important information is the same: not enough players. I saw some competition advertised recently for the best clips from Battle Royales. Fortnite, PUBG, Apex, etc. Well, Firestorm wasn't listed. It wasn't even considered for the competition, which tells you everything you need to know really. And look at YouTube content. Look at how many dedicated Battlefield creators have seemingly abandoned Firestorm now, after solely playing it for a while when it came out. They dropped the multiplayer for it, and now they've done the opposite. Trust me, if viewership numbers were there for Firestorm, that wouldn't be the case. The vast majority of the time, creators go where the views are, because why wouldn't they? Now I saw this all coming. I don't mean this in an I told you so way, I truly don't. I mean that I thought it was obvious that how Firestorm was being implemented was essentially all kinds of wrong. Just a mess and a huge waste of potential. It being placed right into Battlefield 5 as basically an alternative mode, and only advertising in a fashion that was likely to predominantly hit existing Battlefield players, well, it just smacked of something being set up to fail, and not taking advantage of the current Battle Royale craze at all. And here we are now. with basically nobody talking about Firestorm, low player numbers, and it only exists within the consciousness of Battlefield players, which seems to be a pretty low number now anyway, considering recent things we've discussed, such as the removal of UK servers and 2 permanent modes. So you get the picture now, I assume. It's not popular at all, and there's no reason for that to improve, meaning Firestorm will likely continue to dwindle in player numbers until it's essentially abandoned. This for something that hasn't been out for all that long and is essentially a pretty awesome experience at times, despite its downsides. I went back on it for this footage, as stated before, and although there are bugs and glitches, it's very campy and stuff like that, I've had quite a lot of fun going back to it with my friends, which makes the current situation a real shame. There is a good game here, if it's properly utilised. So what would I change? Well, it may well already be too late for Firestorm if I'm honest, but to give it a final fair crack at making something of itself, I'd be pushing as hard as possible for cross-platform play. Look at what that's provided for Fortnite. It boosts player numbers tremendously, both in terms of the amount of people each individual can squad up with and also play against, but also for overall player numbers, because there's an extra incentive for playing via association. If your mate plays on PS4 and you have an Xbox, it's a no-go, but if Firestorm becomes one of the few cross-platform experiences available, it's happy days. And don't tell me it's not possible or whatever, we've just had the announcement that the next Call of Duty is going to be cross-platform, or at least very likely to be. They're pushing it really hard while saying it's a plan, which they'd be unlikely to do if they weren't confident it's going to happen. The time is clearly now for this kind of development. At some point it's going to become an industry norm. Getting in there before that's the case and taking advantage of being an early adopter could be very effective. Of course, DICE may see this as not being worthwhile for their underused Battle Royale mode that seems to be basically unwanted by much of the existing player base. And well, there's nobody else to blame for that than the developers and the publishers, unfortunately. But it could be used as a test, an early trial for cross-platform play within Battlefield itself, and what's to lose, when it could boost the player numbers of said flagging Battle Royale mode? Seemingly nothing. You have to spend money to make money, and ironing out the kinks of cross-platform play now on something like Firestorm is far more attractive to a player such as myself than them implementing it into a full release of the game down the line and potentially having any problems on the scale of what we've seen in Battlefield 5 so far. Because I truly don't think many people will put up with another effort with this many problems. That is, unless they have no interest in going cross-platform at all, which I think would be a dangerous game, when those around you are doing so, especially your rivals within the Battle Royale or first-person shooter scene, while you're asking for trouble. You're risking being left behind and not carrying a selling point that others are. That's not what the Battlefield franchise needs when it's currently viewed as it is by the wider gaming community. The only caveat is they need to ensure they implement a system where controller users only play mouse and keyboard users if they select to or are playing with a mouse and keyboard user in their party, as is pretty standard for cross-platform shooters. But I don't think cross-platform play alone would be enough. That still predominantly relies upon people who already own Battlefield 5, because Firestorm, in my opinion foolishly, wasn't shipped as a standalone game. No, it also needs to go free to play. It desperately needs it. It doesn't matter if that means it becomes available as a standalone title or not, although that would be better to differentiate it from Battlefield 5 from an advertising and marketing standpoint, but whatever the execution, it needs to be completely free to play for all. That's the only possible way it could attract players in a market that already has free-to-play titles such as Fortnite and Apex Legends. How could Firestorm possibly hope to compete whilst it's housed inside a game with the reputation of Battlefield 5 and actually requires a purchase of that game to play it whilst having no hype and low player numbers? Yes, this truly does highlight how large a mountain there is to climb, how much of a waste Firestorm has been, and how unlikely any positive result is. Let's be honest, most hardcore old school Battlefield players weren't interested in a Battle Royale mode, so implementing Firestorm in this manner provided the worst of both worlds. It further split the player base within Battlefield 5, something they're now really struggling with, without significantly appealing to the massive market out there for Battle Royales. It was abysmal business. I don't know who to blame, and it's not really important to me to blame anyone, and I don't even know which company had the overall decision, but it was poor, and it was obvious. Doing these two things I've mentioned is the only way to attempt to rectify it, and it may be too late even for this to work, but if it did, we'd see higher player numbers, which would lead to less wait times and better overall connections. A big improvement, but the changes would need to be heavily advertised, and that's just another stumbling block between Firestorm and success. And I'd love to know your thoughts. So tell me what you think of Firestorm, how it's been implemented, what you would do differently or like to see, and I guess just do you play it even now would be a key point. Let me know. If you're new here, I do these analysis and update videos pretty regularly, but I also do live gameplay which has a totally different and far less professional tone. You can find evidence of that in my recent videos if you fancy giving it a try. And if either of those two options sound attractive to you, then I hope to gain your subscription. I appreciate every single one of you. Now if you enjoyed the video, a like would be just awesome to help it to spread. Turn on those notifications, stay up to date, and get around YouTube not really doing that for subscribers anymore. And feel free to join my Discord server in the description and my pinned comment. Here's the Board of Awesome for the epic people who support the channel on Patreon. They're all absolute heroes and I love them all deeply and of course often. If you want to join them on the Board of Awesome, the link to the Patreon page is in the description and my pinned comment. And with that all said, I'm GetGoodGuy and I'll see you next time. Laters.